Hello, this is the Dean of Vino-Versity coming at you again with another Grapes Anatomy wine lesson. I thought it was a great time of the year to do champagne basics. Probably will end up doing two of these, but when you go to a retail store and you're looking for a great bottle of champagne, I think there's two main label language words you need to know about. I think most people are buying their champagnes nowadays just based on a recognizable name, and there's nothing wrong with that. If you've picked one out and you loved it and you want to buy it again, great, tastes great, buy it again. But if you're also interested in really like looking at that wall of selections and going, oh my god, what is the difference between all these, and why, maybe one of them is even better than the one I've been drinking all along. It would help to know like what they're talking about. So here's the deal. So in the Champagne region of France, they grow three grapes. One is Chardonnay, which is a white grape. The other is Pinot Noir, which is a red grape. And the third is a grape called Pinot Meunier, which is a red grape, Pinot Meunier. And most champagnes that you buy will be a blend of these three grapes, usually. And they won't tell you otherwise. That's just sort of like the standard blend. However, sometimes they will use just white grapes. And in this case, because there's only Chardonnay permitted by agricultural law, it will be only Chardonnay. And that is called a Blanc de Blanc. So Blanc de Blanc is a white-colored champagne drink that is made from all white grape. In this case, it will always be 100% Chardonnay. If you see the terminology, though, of Blanc de Blanc from another part of the world, conceivably it could be other white grapes. It could still be Chardonnay, or it could be any other white grapes that they grow in that part of the world. So that's Blanc de Blanc. If you see the terminology Blanc de Noir, that is a white-colored potion that has been made exclusively with dark grapes. So again, in the Champagne region, that would be either from all Pinot Noir or all Pinot Meunier, or a combination of the two, but it basically will have no white grapes in the mixture. Okay, so now that you know what that means, what does that mean for your palate? What does that mean for the taste? Generally speaking, the Blanc de Blanc with the all Chardonnay juice, when you squeeze Chardonnay grapes, the juice that comes out has a natural kind of flavor of orchard fruit, like apples and pears, and that can vary from very crisp, super tart, like Granny Smith apples, and very nice tart, hard pears, or it could almost taste like apples and pears that have been baked in the oven in a pie, or like a nice like pastry. So that is the range of the orchard fruit flavor of Chardonnay grape. Then the grape juice itself tends to be a little bit heavier than the grape juice that is squeezed out of the red grape. So when you get a Blanc de Blanc, very often when you drink it, it just kind of feels a little more substantial, has a little more weight to it, sits down on the tongue a little bit more, and you want to you could almost eat it. It's got a little more substance to it. The Blanc de Noir juice, the juice coming out of the Pinot Noir and Pinot Meunier, when you squeeze that juice, it's a little more tart. It has more of an essence, very subtle, but more of an essence of tart cranberries and tart rhubarb and tart cherry blossom. And the juice itself is a little leaner. It's not as thick and viscous and nectary and weighted as the Chardonnay juice. So when you drink it, it sits a little lighter on the tongue. To that end, the other difference, and you can feel it, is when you drink something coming out of red grapes. When they crush those red grapes and you get the red ink from the skins, even though they don't let a lot of the ink come out, because if they did, that would become a rosé. They crush those red grapes, white juice comes out, there's just the tiniest bit of red ink that will make the most subtle pink tinge on your Blanc de Noir, but it's still white at the end of the day. A rosé is definitively pink colored, so that would be from letting the ink come out more and more. But when you have just even a small influence of the ink, you are also giving a little more of the tannic structure, and tannins are the acidic component found in skins and in oak, that basically I look at it as almost acting like a magnet, almost, where it draws the molecules in and compacts and compresses the juice. So the juice itself feels more linear, more focused, and it literally goes right down the center of the tongue. versus juices that have less tannins. They're not as sort of cohesive. They're not bound together by this like magnetic attraction. So the molecules are sort of free floating. And when you drink them, they kind of go like this, and they kind of go up and out, and they don't go like this or like this, but they kind of go like that. So we experience roundness, and then again that weight of the Chardonnay. So when I go to pick out a bottle of champagne, I personally love Blanc de Blanc because I love how it has a little more body to it. It has a little more almost like a richness of texture to it, and I like the whole apple pear tones. But at the end of the day, I've had some great Blanc de Noirs where I was like, oh, it's like super pucker, lip smack, linear, boom, and it kind of wakes you up, and it's perky and zesty. And if you want something in the middle of those two, then you just get a bottle that is not labeled with either. You're getting one that just simply has a combination of those two juices blended together. That's your any other champagne label that indicates nothing would actually have that blend. Okay, that is the basic difference between the champagne grape makeup and what it means for the style of the champagne. Now, fundamental number 2 about champagne. If again trying to pick out a bottle and you're like, I don't know what to get, there's something to be said about discerning between purchasing a non-vintage versus a vintage champagne. And you know, the idea of a vintage champagne, so in the world of like regular table wine, every harvest is a vintage. So vintage is synonymous with the year the grapes were harvested. So every year pretty much is a vintage. In champagnes and sparkling wines, it takes on a new meaning. Vintage would be a year where the harvest was just spectacular. The grapes were basically perfect, and they were so just perfectly balanced in acid and sugar and whatnot that the winemaker, the house, the winery, decides to just isolate that juice. And they basically say, let's take this juice from this one year that is just perfect from this location, whether it's the whole estate or a parcel, because everything is different. Even, 20 yards down the road could be a whole different microcosm of weather. So let's say they make 1,000 bottles from that juice, from that one year, from that one location. And then they will put the year right on the bottle. So you can't miss. If there is a year on the bottle, that is called a vintage champagne, or what's called a declared vintage. They're almost declaring the perfection of this crop and letting you know that they've isolated this grape juice. Okay, so why do we care about that? Well, if you're drinking something from one crop from one year and Mother Nature changes every year, then that means that juice will never actually be created again. So it basically is like a snowflake. Mother Nature has produced certain flavors in that grape crop for that one year and will never do it exactly the same way twice. So when you drink those 1,000 bottles, that's it. It's limited. And let's just say you buy a bottle off the shelf of your local store and you picked out that bottle from a vintage. How do you know that the other 999 bottles haven't already been consumed? They might have been. You might be holding in your hand the last remaining bottle from that year, from that location. And now you realize, oh my God, so I'm holding something that is incredibly rare, and I am the only person in the world with it, perhaps. And perhaps as I open the bottle and drink it and it goes into my belly, I basically am the only person on the planet experiencing that juice at that time. That's kind of cool. Also, think of it like this. Once you drink that last bottle, now that crop, that expression of flavor from that year is now extinct. It's done. It's gone from the planet and it will never exist again. So that's another kind of really wicked concept to think, oh my God, I am the last person to drink the last bottle of this, like forever. So that's a really neat idea. That's vintage. When you do not see the year printed on the label, you'll see NV, non-vintage, which really almost should really be like MV, like M as in multi. It should really almost be like thought of as multi-vintage. So each year they're gonna have these different crops of juices, and they're gonna pick the grapes, and they're going to make wines. And don't forget, they're making wine from many of these grapes, the Chardonnay grape, the Pinot Noir grape, the Pinot Meunier grape, from the Champagne region, if we're talking about just Champagne. And they're going to be planting those 3 grapes in all different parcels all throughout the region. And each of those parcels will yield a different flavor because, again, depending on the environment around those grapes, the grapes will change. So they might make 10 different Chardonnays and 10 different Pinot Noirs and 10 different Pinot Meuniers that year. And maybe they'll use some of them, right? But at the end of the day, they have some left over, and they're going to put them in a wine cellar, and they're going to let them age. And very often, they're going to let them age in oak barrels, which is an additive thing. Barrels add sugars and spices and oils into the juices. So a winery, a champagne house, might have a collection, a curated library of all different juices made from all different years that they're holding. And so in a multi-vintage or a non-vintage, they'll take the current year's crop, okay, pick the grapes, great, crush it, make the juice, ferment, make wine. And then they'll take that wine and they might say, hey, let's go to our little library. Let's pick out another Chardonnay from like 10 years ago, or a second Chardonnay even from 3 years ago, and a Pinot Noir from 7 years ago, and a little Pinot Meunier maybe from 12 years ago. And we're going to fractionally blend this whole recipe. And so now you're making this layer cake of all different grape juices, not just from the 3 grapes, but from the idea of different ages of these grapes, and each of them now having sat in the library and marinating and metamorphosizing over time. And now you're making this very special secret potion recipe. And that is a non-vintage. So it's very exciting. They could really come up with an infinite number of like blends of these grapes. So the idea of the non-vintage is, yeah, you're getting a really incredible, complex, like multi-layered cake, right? And in theory, each house will say, well, gee, we really had great success with this recipe. Everybody loved it. Let's try to make it again the next year. But, you know, you realize at some point in time, all those juices that went in, some of them, maybe one of those juices might just run out, or maybe 2 of them run out. Maybe they all run out. At some point, the recipe is kind of screwed, right? Because you're like, what am I going to do? I can't make the same recipe. I ran out of a juice or juices. So they have to go back to the library and pick out different juices again. And then they try to make a blend, right? A cepage, a blend that, even though might have different characteristics from the prior used juices, they're going to try to make a new ratio that comes out almost exactly the same if they can. And I think for the average person, when you go to buy a bottle that you love and you buy it again the next year and the next year and the next year, for all intents and purposes, I don't think most people can tell the difference. You're not going to sit and say, oh my God, what's wrong with this bottle? It tastes wildly different from the one I had 6 months ago or a year ago. Are there people who will maybe criticize and say, yeah, it's not the same as it was, 10 years ago? I suppose that could happen over time, that the general recipe might, shift and morph enough for you to detect it. But for the most part, I think the average person will sit and buy their bottle of champagne and say, I love this, and I still love it to this day, and it's my favorite, and I know I can go to it, and it's never going to disappoint me. And ironically, it is made from probably entirely different juices than it was when you first tasted it, but the overarching recipe, the end result, equals the same flavor that you've been having. They're able to manipulate the blend to yield the same flavor, or the same flavor. That is the beauty of non-vintage. It kind of never runs out, even though it really does. So anyway, that's the basic lesson between vintage and non-vintage. Vintage champagnes do tend to be a little more expensive because of the idea that they are more exclusive. They literally won't exist and cannot be remade after they run out. And because of that exclusivity, they will be more money. And you decide if you think one is better than the other. But for all intents and purposes, there's no such thing as better. It's always what you love to drink. So on that, Slanjava, and pretend I have a champagne flute in my hand. Cheers.